Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Peace Corps virtual information session. We have a wonderful guest speaker joining us today. Insights on the Peace Corps, process of applying, and the types of experiences you're going to see. So I'll hand it over to our representative, let him introduce himself, and jump into our topic for the day.
Thank you very much, Amelia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Hausch. I am a recruiter for the Peace Corps. First and foremost, this session is being recorded, so you're welcome to view this later, I believe via Career Services in their YouTube channel. For that reason, I won't be taking a lot of questions throughout the presentation, just to make the content easier, but we will have a Q&A session towards the end. So feel free to use the chat box to just throw in questions you'd like for parking lot. Or I think they'll be unmuting people later on in the process. Also, just in case you get cut off or you need to step out for a moment, I have just put my information in the chat box. The first is my email. You are welcome to email me at any time to set up a phone call, discuss more about Peace Corps service, etc. The second is my phone number, 802, which is a Vermont extension. It's not a telemarketing number. And please, you can either leave me a voicemail or text me your first name, last name, and email as a minimum. You are welcome to call me. Unfortunately, I do have quite a bit of scheduled calls throughout the day, so you may or may not end up leaving a mail or voicemail. But please feel free to utilize those options to get in touch with me if you have questions either during or after this session. So again, my name is Adam Hausch. I am not only a recruiter for the Peace Corps for the South Florida region, I am also a returned Peace Corps volunteer myself. As you can see from this photo in the top right, I was a Peace Corps volunteer and I served in the Republic of Armenia from 2012 to 2015. I actually loved my service so much, I actually extended my contract from the initial 27 months. I extended an extra 12 months. And so I was in Armenia for a full total of 39 months. Some of these numbers are a teeny bit old in terms of just the actual numeric value. So for instance, I am not one of 230,000. I'm actually one of 265,000 volunteers who served in Peace Corps. It's, at least from my side, it's a really big pain to update the some of the photos and the formatting of the PowerPoint. So just bear with me as I update things as we talk. So again, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Armenia. This photo on the top right was actually taken during my service. And this was after working in the fields. My village was mostly filled with potato farmers in the fields for about 3 weeks harvesting potatoes. And every summer, my host family and I would harvest about 3 or 4 tons by hand that we would then keep and sell throughout the year for our food, our resources, etc. We also kept livestock, cows, sheep, chickens, etc. So even though I was born and raised in Ohio, kind of a city boy, I learned very quickly how to deal with crops, livestock, things of that nature. And I learned really to enjoy lamb because I found out that sheep can be very, very mean. So yeah, I was an education volunteer, meaning I worked in a school system, particularly in a small rural village. And I taught English grades 3 through 12, not only to students, but also to teachers. So I was, on the one hand, focused on that direct English instruction, on the other hand, focused on teaching methodologies, student-centered learning, really making the class interactive and fun, and getting students to utilize the language versus simply practicing and speaking phrases. In my time in the Peace Corps and in Armenia, I, at any given time, would be speaking English, of course, my native language. I would be speaking Eastern Armenian, which was what you hear most commonly in the villages, or I might be using little smidgets of Russian language. Armenians are bilingual. Many speak Russian. A growing chunk will speak English now. And there were days where literally I would be asked a question, I would answer it, and I could not tell you what language we had done it in. Prior to my service in the Peace Corps, I was a student at The Ohio State University, where I studied political science with a focus on Eastern Europe. And then after my Peace Corps service, I came back to the United States and completed my graduate degree in peace building and conflict transformation. So Peace Corps for me was always this way of getting out in international development, getting involved on a grassroots level in community development, and really making that one-on-one difference. So enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about the Peace Corps itself. Peace Corps, as some of you may or may not know, we are a U.S. government agency, and we are focused primarily on promoting world peace and friendship. So when I think of this mission, it always sounds very idealistic. We are one of the few places that really sort of walks our talk and that we really just want to do good in the world. We're very passionate about making that difference, helping people better themselves in their own community. So we promote world peace and friendship through three primary goals or objectives. The first is helping people in their countries fulfill their need for trained men and women. So every single task that we do has a teaching component. I don't go and teach English to students. I teach English to students, and I teach teachers new methodologies of teaching English. The idea is I'm not the owner of a particular project. I am a facilitator helping to raise the capacity of local persons so that they can continue developing in their community. Since realistically, they're the ones who live there, they're the ones who benefit directly from that investment, and they're the ones who have the long-term buy-in. Whereas I, as a volunteer, may be limited in my term of service to how long I'm actually serving. Goals 2 and 3, culture exchange. We are promoting a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people we serve. When I was in Armenia, in my small village, Veringetaşan was the name, many Armenians in that village had never really met an American face-to-face, or they might have seen a tourist in passing. But realistically, their biggest perception of Americans came from the media. They thought I was going to be a supermodel. They thought I was going to be filthy rich. They thought I was going to be having sex all the time. And instead, they basically get a 300-pound guy from Ohio who has about $7 in his bank account, right? So I was a complete opposite. They thought I was going to be really picky and complain all the time. There was going to be problems with food, housing. Nope, I was pretty much happy with anything I got. I thought the food was wonderful. And so automatically off the bat, just by existing, I was already showing a different side of America, right? That there are people and viewpoints that exist outside of television. And then when people ask me, why is this different from what I've seen? I would tell them, like, well, do you watch television to be entertained, or do you watch it to see the reality, right? No one wants to watch TV and watch a person get up, go to school, come home, make a sandwich, go to bed, right? That's boring. You want to see, violence, explosions, interesting things. Same thing for goal 3. When I went to Armenia, my family, we're all born and raised Ohio. They really had never heard of Armenia as a country. The first time my mother heard me speaking Armenian as a language, she thought I was speaking Arabic. During my service, there was an earthquake. I forget where, but she immediately called Peace Corps. Oh my God, is my son okay? They were very polite in that they said, your son is nowhere near, like not even in the same region of the world where that earthquake occurred, but he is perfectly fine. We will check in with him. I called my mom 2 days later from Skype. And to be honest, Peace Corps told me early, I was just kind of like, I'm not really in a rush to have that conversation. But that education, right? Like I teach my family, my friends, people in America that I know and work with about Armenia, about the wonders of service, the rich history, and everything about that. So in terms of how we actually do this, as some people may be aware, we're a U.S. government agency, and we take volunteers from the United States and we send them all around the world for the fulfillment of these 3 goals. The term of service is 27 months. That's 3 months of training in that country, plus an additional 2 years of service also in that country. During training, we will teach you the language, we teach you the culture, and we teach you the actual skill sets for technical skills needed to perform that position, and more specifically in that cultural context. Or as I call it, talk, don't offend people, do your job. And in the Armenian context, that meant I was learning Eastern Armenian, basic survival phrases, more advanced phrases, language needed to work as an English teacher. As far as intercultural skill sets, I was learning what's appropriate, what's not appropriate for the Armenian classroom. Some basic things we as teachers or students in America might do, drinking water in the middle of a lesson, putting your foot on a chair, just various little things like that in the Armenian classroom might be considered inappropriate. For instance, your feet are considered dirty. You don't put them on like surfaces. You don't drink water. It's just considered a little disrespectful. And then third, technical skill sets. Not only how do I create a lesson plan, how do I manage my classroom, but also how do I do that in a rural village environment where students may be transitioning from a different style of education to the education that I'm teaching, to the model I'm using in my English classroom. You know, a lot of classes are more strict, they're much more structured. So when you're coming in with a vocabulary game or a think, pair, share exercise to really spread, what you realize is first you have to teach the students how to do those exercises before just throwing it at them. So really, again, providing that three-prong framework for training, 2 years of service. And this program is, again, entirely paid for by the United States government. Food, plane tickets, medical care, clothing, internet, cell phone, you name it, we cover it. And I'll go more into the benefits and the actual sort of quality of service later. But for many people, this is not only a way to go out, promote world peace, make a difference, actually help. It's also a way to set yourself up for a direct career path in international education, development, business, agriculture, et cetera, because we work pretty much all across the board in terms of international development scenarios, in terms of actually making the world a better place and making an impact on our communities. And we do have post-Peace Corps opportunities for graduate school, jobs in the federal government, nonprofit sector, et cetera. So again, this is not, so our program is not only a way of going out there and making that difference, but it's also a very relevant way to build skill sets and begin or pivot a career path. So before I go into talking a little more about why people join Peace Corps, the sort of technicalities of the organization, I just want to show a few photos from my service, from Armenia. So the top left, this little guy with the belt, this was my host brother, Arman, from my training family. Basically, during Peace Corps service, you live with a host family for your first 6 months. 3 months with one family during training, 3 months with one family during your actual move to your work site. And then after that 6 months, you can move out and get your own apartment, or you can stay with your host family. I personally stayed with my host family just because I really enjoyed the vibe. We got along really well. So this is my host brother, Arman. He was a very small, sweet kid, but he had a set of lungs on him. Every morning he would just scream his head off. Basically, whenever his mother would ask him to call people over for breakfast or dinner, and instead of like going to get them, he would just do that little kid thing of like screaming. So the very first word in Armenian I learned was the word keri, which is the uncle from the mother's side of the family. And his uncle's name was Hrach. So every morning I would wake up and it would just be like, Hrach, oh, keri, like Uncle Hrach, just like screaming it down the neighborhood. Behind him, you have one of the neighbor boys, and then you have his cousin, Zhenya, who lived right next door to us, sweet kid. To the right, you have his grandmother, Susanna. She was just a sweet little old lady, carried like candies in her pockets and would like sneak them to you when no one was around. She unfortunately died about halfway through my service, about 1.5 years in. And that was as a result, high blood pressure, diabetes. She was an older woman and just didn't manage those conditions very well. So that was one of the more mourning periods of my service, but she was really one of the sweetest women I've known. We always just called her Tatik, which means grandmother. Bottom middle, this is a boys camp from one of our projects. This is called BRO, Boys Reaching Out. We eventually rebranded the name because we just didn't feel like BRO was a good branding for young men. But this was the older crowd, I believe 17 to 19. And we had a campfire. It's on the other side of the photo. And it was just like, sort of like what you would expect from many outdoor-based youth programs. The sort of like playing the guitar, talking, like job skills. A really wonderful program for developing young men, their mindsets, their responsibility to the community, and just having a good time as well. Top left, we have the counselors for our opposite program, GLOW, Girls Leading Our World, which was focused on women's empowerment, gender equality, job skills, etc. In this case, we utilized mostly all female counselors, half Armenian, half American, and then we had 2 male counselors, myself as the American for this round, and then we had one Armenian man, Arsen, who was taking the photograph at this time. And so if you actually go and type in YouTube Adam Hausch and the word happy, like from the Happy Song from Pharrell, there's actually a video of us at that camp all dancing, and it was like a music video they made. Very well, I'm from Ohio. I do the left and right shuffle, but still a fun video to watch. Middle, again, my host family, Arman, his sister Susik, mother Shushan, and this is Hrach, the uncle that he always screamed for every morning. Top right is just me leading a small session with students from a small village. And in this case, we were focused on intercultural and respect, specifically respect toward animals. And just a really fun session. We had a larger session, like a plenary, and then we broke into small groups. So just beautiful environment. The top or the bottom left is probably my favorite photo of Armenia. This is a photo of Yerevan, the capital. So here you can see like just the apartment housing. Some of this is Soviet Union style. Some of it is more modern. Very beautiful in terms of flowers and green spaces. And then this mountain in the background, Mount Ararat. If you're not familiar with Mount Ararat, it is historically where Noah's Ark supposedly landed in the Bible. So I always called it the biggest guilt trip you'll ever see, because if you were ever doing anything you weren't supposed to, it's like literally, like you're being watched. They can see you right there. And this is actually in modern day Turkey, if I remember correctly, but it's large enough you can see it from most of southern Armenia. So just a beautiful site, very long historic history and background and culture, and very, very deep roots in terms of religious background. And then this is just me and a couple of volunteers. We were camping out overnight. We needed wood for a fire, and we ended up in a portion of the country where there just were no trees. It was mostly fields. And I don't know where these guys came from, but they had a gigantic truck full of wood. I asked to buy some, and they just threw a couple logs off for us. So super nice guys. Definitely violating some worker safety conventions here, but it's still having a great time and just being nice guys. So these are just, again, some photos from my service and my love for Armenia and what I've done through Peace Corps. So coming from that, let's talk a little bit as to what actually brings people to Peace Corps. What's the actual impetus that people, what is their reason for serving? So there's a few different reasons, but realistically, many people come to Peace Corps just because they want to make a difference. They want to do something different, and they want to be a direct driver of betterness and betterment in someone's life. They want to do something good, and they don't want to do it on that sort of like, they don't want to just like throw it out somewhere and hope the world is better. They want to be in a community, one-on-one, actually helping people right in front of them, right? You can do that locally, you can do that internationally, and in Peace Corps, we do that on that international scale. You can fully immerse yourself in a new culture, a new way of thinking, a new way of absorbing the world. And I personally found that in my case, that not only helps me there in that country, it also helped me bring a lot of those skill sets back into my own community here in the United States. You build relationships, you meet friends, you have experiences you never would have had before. And then also just you create and sharpen skill sets. When I arrived in Armenia, I was slotted to teach English as a foreign language. During my time in Armenia, I was teaching English, I was teaching teachers, I was doing infrastructure grants, I was doing project design and management, I was doing training, I was doing logistics for nationwide programs. There was one portion I was even speaking with customs officials and negotiating basically the release of packages that had been seized as commercial goods. So when I arrived, I was fresh out of college. To be honest, I had very little hard skill sets outside of the classroom. And this was a way for me to not only apply these skill sets in a way that might be different from, say, an internship or from that like coming out of college first job. It was also a way for me to just look at things like adaptability, flexibility, my own personal skill sets and learning about myself, and while at the same time making a difference in someone else's life and actually working in a community and seeing the impact that I'm having on my students, their families, even the direct infrastructure of my village. For instance, one project I did in my school system, they did not have running water, they did not have sewers, they didn't have restrooms. So, a direct view of that is school systems so that students would have a place to use the restroom. They weren't losing time going back home every day. There was health and sanitation. The rate of illness goes down significantly, providing wash training. So really making a direct impact on that school system in a very concrete, real way. And again, as I said before, all of these projects are designed to be taken co-ownership with the community. So I was doing this with community partners, local engineers. This project was not just me giving the money or me just building or doing something. It was, we were using their resources, we were hiring their workers, we were using their engineers to build this project and hopefully continue and maintain ownership of this project after I left. So one thing I just want to note with Peace Corps is many people come in for different reasons. There's always that little bit of, I want to save the world, do something good. There's also that little bit of, I'm trying to bulk my resume, create a skill set, and start a career path. And then there's that kind of merging of the two, right? There's the altruistic side. There's the, I want to look at my long-term betterment side. I've seen people come in very altruistic, I'll do anything, anywhere. I've seen people that are like, you know what, I'm just here to learn the job, get the skills, and I've seen both have positive services. But realistically, there's always that mixture of the two, right? Who comes into the Peace Corps? We have about 7,000 volunteers in the field at any given time. Around 265,000 have served. We always skew a little more female than male. That's, to be honest, I'm not sure why, but in that particular case, there's no direct recruitment initiative or anything in that range. Anyone who is above the age of 18 has a U.S. citizenship, and for the most part that have a college degree are welcome to apply. We're always looking at inclusion. We're always looking at showing the real diversity and the reality of the United States. Our volunteers can range anywhere from 18 years of age all the way to, I believe our oldest is 87. I think now it's 84 because the 87-year-old finished up their service. 90% of our volunteers would recommend service. I don't know any of the 10%, probably not really worth talking to. And realistically, about 95% of our volunteers will have an undergraduate degree. And that's really more of a standard in international development now. There are some countries that will not even issue a visa without an undergraduate degree. If you don't have an undergraduate degree or you have experience in a field that is alternative to an undergraduate degree, 3 to 5 years experience can act in lieu of that degree, especially if you're looking at agriculture or business topics. I would say for an undergraduate degree, for anything education-based in the school systems, definitely will require that degree. But you don't need to have it to apply. You need to have it to get on the plane. So feel free to check through our positions. It will state if a degree is required or not. And for the average undergraduate student, usually the person will apply during senior year. That way they can depart right after they graduate. Multicultural, we're about 25% multicultural as an agency. That number is not perfect because we do not require persons to provide their sexual orientation, gender identity, nationality, ethnicity, et cetera. These are simply numbers by persons who have decided to disclose to us that they are multicultural or diverse in some capacity. But again, we are always focused on being as inclusive as possible, being as open as possible, and not only looking at the opportunities for service, but also are there any obstacles to service? And that's one reason why we basically pay for the entire program. We want to make sure that we are not excluding persons based off of socioeconomic backgrounds, even education backgrounds. We do allow for those. Again, if you have that 3 to 5 year experience, you can possibly come in and lieu of a degree. So again, we're always committed to being as open and accepting as an agency, and again, showing the reality of the United States. That's one thing we as an agency really focus on in our international activities, is being as authentic and true to ourselves as possible. And then over 50 plus, 7-8%, if I remember correctly, this is usually retirees. Realistically speaking, you can come in at any age between this 18 to 87 or even higher. It's really about when do you not have, car payments, credit card payments, children, a dog, sort of things that might keep you rooted to the U.S. and make it difficult for you to pack up and go abroad for 27 months. So we see our largest bursts coming fresh out of college, fresh out of grad school, or retirement, but there's also been that growing middle trend. So if you know someone who's in their 40s who are unhappy with their position and they're trying to pivot into something new, Peace Corps might be an opportunity for that as well. So we've seen people coming in all across the professional board. Married couples, you can serve as a couple. You do not have to be legally married. So that is something as well. We have placements where you live and serve together. What do we actually do? So when our volunteers apply, you're sort of applying for a specific sector or a specialization, as we call it. Education volunteers teach English, math, or science in school systems. This can be anywhere from kindergarten to university level. I myself was an educator in Armenia. I taught grades 3 through 12. I did teacher trainings. I did adult business courses in English for the local community. So pretty much all across the board. Community economic development, this is business finance, international development, the idea of what you see, job creation, marketing, financial flows. This works with NGOs, nonprofits, government agencies, etc. And the difference you'll see in background, education volunteer is any four-year degree of any kind, some experience with mentorship, youth transfer, or skills transfer to youth. This can be internship, volunteer-based, etc. It can be part of a course curriculum, even if it's a practicum for background. Economic development, this is usually you see your business majors, your finance majors, econ, different, that's sort of like numbers, direct business-based backgrounds. Sometimes hospitality management, marketing. Youth development is focused on after-school programming, so job skills, gender equality, life skills, kind of that idea of like, think YMCA, YWCA, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, those sort of programs that are looking at youth in a holistic approach outside of the classroom. So here it's similar to education in that any degree path is welcome. I see a lot of people with social work background looking at youth development. And realistically, we do like to see some experience with NGOs, nonprofits, youth development projects, focused on not only that were you a counselor, but also do you have any experience on the back end? So travel logistics, curriculum, parental consent, that's sort of like what are the bones of making this project run. Also, I just always want to push that youth development is fairly small in comparison to education, and there's a lot of overlap. So if you're really interested in youth development, but you're kind of like, I'm not sure, or this position seems a little out there for me, I would look at the same country for an education position. And realistically speaking, you'll be helping out on both sides. Health is public health outreach. That's teaching that's teaching about medical topics facing that community. So, and we're looking at essentially changing behavior and mitigating risk factors. So this can be HIV/AIDS, STIs, prenatal care, sanitation, wash training, malaria, really focused on, it can be anti-smoking and anti-drinking. It's really focused on that community and the issue that that particular community is facing. I can tell you, for instance, in Armenia, we did not have a direct health concentration for volunteers. Armenia only requested education and youth development. But if we did a health project in Armenia, it was exclusively almost always anti-smoking. Armenia has a very high rate of smoking, so we were just trying to really focus on that. And this usually you see public health majors, pre-med, nursing. I've seen some people with EMT backgrounds. Really just do you have the, even biology, do you have that basic knowledge of health topics and the human body to help go out into the field? Environment, environmental protection, reclamation projects. And this can be, I've seen this anywhere from working off the coast of the Philippines, looking at coastal resource management. I've seen it as resource management in Mexico, working in rural communities. I've seen it in Tanzania, working with park and game reserves. So very versatile field, and this we usually see a lot of environmental studies, environmental engineers, various environment-based backgrounds. Agriculture, sustainable fishing, sustainable farming, beekeeping. Sometimes we'll link this with this business background of what's the return on investment for crops? Is it really focused? And this can be anywhere from general interest to you've had experience on your father, your uncle, your cousin's farm, all the way to having a degree in soil science or farming, agriculture, et cetera. One important note that I always like to talk about is this idea of secondary projects. When you're applying for a program, say for instance where I served Armenia, you would say Armenia and then your specialty, education. This is because we're creating a base agreement with that government that as of, if you do nothing else, I will teach English in that classroom. Secondary projects is when those other things come into play, where I was doing infrastructure building, running water pipelines, sewers for the school restrooms, when I was doing after school programming, when I was doing HIV/AIDS trainings in some areas of the country, project design management trainings. This all falls under secondary projects. And these you kind of create on your own with that community. So if you're in education, but you really have a passion for health, you can help with health projects in that community if they have a need. So there's a lot of ways to individualize your impact, really work with your community based off of what they need, what they want, and the skill sets you have or are willing to develop. Where can we serve? Peace Corps, we're in 65 countries, give or take, at any given time. And you can choose exactly where you'd like to serve based off your skill sets, your language skills, etc. For anything Spanish speaking, and then a couple countries French speaking, we will require at least 1 year college level Spanish or French. So anything Latin America, South Central America, from the African continent, I believe, I'm going to say Senegal, I believe, Senegal, Cameroon, Guinea are where you usually see preferences for French, but it's not always required. But pretty much everywhere else, we start from zero. When I arrived in Armenia, I learned hello on the plane. I started from essentially zero in the training model. And at the end of my 2 years, or my 3 years, I was there for a third year. At the end of my 3 years, I was listed as advanced high, meaning I was giving full lessons and trainings in Eastern Armenian. I was doing meetings in Eastern Armenian. So a very high level of fluency at the end of that time. What do we actually give you during service? Again, we pay for absolutely everything. Plane tickets, food, medical care, medical, dental, and coverage are absolutely wonderful. You just walk in, get it done, Peace Corps pays, and you walk out. Half time, you don't even have to sign in that you were a volunteer there. Peace Corps just already set it up and you're done. In Armenia, I received my meds, no problem. I had high blood pressure, so I would take a medication daily. Dental coverage, I had a root canal, a cleaning, and I think I had a couple cavities. All of that, I walked into Peace Corps, saw the doctors, they took me to the dentist. The dentists were modern, spoke English, it was perfectly fine medicine. And at the end, do I have to pay, do I have to sign, show my insurance? No, Peace Corps covered you, have a good day. So I just kept on with my day. And of course, this is both routine and emergency care, so everything is set up. We actually used to make the joke in Peace Corps that if you get sick, you should do it in Peace Corps because they have to pay for everything. Student loan deferment cancellation. If you have federal loans, that is, anything from the Department of Education, subsidized, unsubsidized, direct, non-direct, Parent Plus, those usually can be deferred during service. Some can be canceled. The cancellation is very particular on the particular loans. So if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me directly. Anything private loans, unfortunately, you do have to discuss with your loan provider. We can't make agreements with individual banks. As far as vacation time, you receive 48 days vacation during your Peace Corps service, and most volunteers will use that for international travel. As I tell every person who's considering being a volunteer, if you're looking to travel around that particular country, make up a work reason. You can work with other volunteers and collaborate. Vacation time we use exclusively almost for international travel. So you can come back to the US, you can visit other countries in the region, Western Europe, wherever you want to bounce around, provided there's not a large-scale safety advisory from the US State Department or something like that. Career skills and training. Not only do we provide you the language training, the intercultural training, and the direct training, we also provide general training in coaching, project design management, grant writing. All of those are directly created by, provided by, and backed up by the United States government. So those are great certificates to have listed on your resume, especially because at the same time that you're being certified in those, you're usually beginning to implement those in the field. So when I finished my service in Armenia, not only did I say I received direct certification in project design and management in my first year of service, in my second year of service, I used that for infrastructure grants of up to $20,000 that I completed in rural environments. My third year, I was involved in the training and certification of newer volunteers, right? So a very quick path from zero knowledge to mastery. And so when I came out of Peace Corps, that was something I was able to put on exact numbers, exact hours, and it looks really great for employers when you're looking nonprofit government coming back. Safety and health, we provide 24/7 medical, safety, and security, trained staff, everything we need to make sure that you are happy, you are healthy, and that your service is as fulfilling as possible. We utilize what we call community immersion training for many of our volunteers, which is, I jokingly used to call it street smarts training, but it's essentially teaching you language skills, it's teaching you cultural aspects of your community, For example, I know in Armenia, one big thing was smoking in public. If you were a woman and you smoked in public, in many cases that would be sort of in Armenian they would say that was an indicator that you were a bad girl. So really just knowing that these are certain actions that are inappropriate. As a young man in Armenia, I had to realize that the idea of male-female friendships are not as nebulous as in the U.S. So if I was talking to a young woman and I thought we were being friends, sometimes there might be the misinterpretation that I'm trying to court, right? So I had to be very careful and wary of things like that, especially in a rural village environment. But just having that knowledge, having that training means that I'm not walking around like a bull in a china shop and just offending people left and right, making myself stand out. Also just knowing the community. Peace Corps, they give you links in the community, training in the community. So at the end of the day, not only do you know what's appropriate, you know the language, you also know the community itself. You know these are important people in the community, you've had the introductions, you have the relationships, you know the infrastructure, basically everything as if this was a place you grew up in. And also in many cases, your community receives similar training for you. So when I arrived in my community, Veringetaşin, not only did I know where the nearest hospital was, the roads out, where the phones were, pharmacy, where would I go in case of emergency. I had contacts and friends. I knew different linguistic skills to keep myself out of trouble. And then at the end of the day, my community, they all knew who I was. They knew this is the volunteer. He's, they would kind of explain it to him in Armenian that I was doing body gorstitution, I was doing charity work, that I was helping, working with kids in the community, in the school system. So also my community looked out for me very heavily. So it's, in my time, I never absolutely had a problem. And in many cases, that's the community immersion training, is that your community also wants the service to be productive because they directly benefit from this relationship as well. But that being said, we also have direct relationships with police, first responders. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, but we have 24/7, any moment of the day. We have safety, security, doctors, and generally by the time you go to your work site, it's gone through close to 3 years of site assessment in terms of, are there any environmental factors, what's the crime rates, what is the community like, the host families have been vetted, the jobs, et cetera. So, and that's all provided to you as well. So when I arrived in my village, I knew my host family, I knew their names, I knew their interests. Like, it was, it was kind of cool, actually. Benefits after serving. First and foremost, we give you direct transition funds. That's called a readjustment allowance. It's roughly $10,000. This number, 8,000, is a little old. And that's to basically help you set yourself up back in the U.S. Get a car, get an apartment, maybe, buy some nice clothes for job interviews. Basically set yourself up as you're looking for grad school, your next job. I've seen some people that literally just blow it and go travel around and then come back and stay with their families. I don't recommend that, but you do whatever works for you. But the idea is that funding is set aside specifically for you at the end of your service, and it's given to you in a lump sum so that you can decide what the most appropriate use of it is. We have direct graduate school benefits, which I'll talk about in just a second. Professional networking and career services, where we actually have a Return Peace Corps volunteer website. We have non-competitive eligibility for federal government jobs. And realistically, the idea behind Peace Corps is you go abroad, you serve, you better that community, you better yourself, and then once you come back, you sort of pipeline yourself into a position in nonprofit, government, or some form of service to the community. So we help with that direct employment finding and long-term career path building as well. And then public service loan forgiveness. There are programs where if you essentially income-based for a certain amount of time, and then at the end, your remainder of your income or the remainder of your debt gets wiped away. And then, of course, direct access to affordable health insurance after you finish Peace Corps until you're able to find that next insurance package from your employer or grad school. So, again, as I said, graduate school, we do have a, forgive me one second. We do have a program called the Peace Corps Coverdell Fellowship, which is essentially a fellows program with more than 200 plus university degree partner programs that you're eligible for life. So these are financial aid, scholarships, tuition waivers that are set aside specifically for Peace Corps volunteers at these universities. And if you type in Peace Corps graduate school fellows, it'll usually pop right up. You can see a list of exactly which universities, exactly what they offer, and then what I like is the exact number left over. So if it's, I know a couple schools offer a full ride. It'll literally say, this school has provided the tuition waiver, this valued at, let's go high, 27, let's go 40,000 a year, which I don't know. And then it'll say at the end, this is what the school has estimated the cost, and then this is your remainder. It's got that nice, beautiful zero. Others might have, this school is providing, like where I went to grad school, they offered me about 10,000 a year towards tuition. I received free room and board on campus, and then I was still accessible for, or I still had access to the general FAFSA and other merit-based scholarships. So once all of that came together, I was like, okay, I'm going to graduate school here. So it can work out very well. And that's something, again, you can research online. We show the exact numbers, so you can kind of create a long or middle to long-term path of, I want to go into Peace Corps, I want to go to a grad program. After that grad program, I'd like to work for roughly this kind of agency or within this field, and actually set yourself up for that career path. And again, that's eligible for life. So you come out of Peace Corps and you're like, I need a couple of years, or I need to figure some things out. You can go in at any time. Some of these most of these are master's programs. There are some PhD level as well. What does our application process look like? We are constantly trying to make the process more streamlined, easier to understand. And realistically, even though we show it as 8 steps, it's actually, I always tell people it's more like 3 or 4. These first 3, browse, apply, and health history, all come together. You're checking out our website, which will look something like this. You're choosing your position. You're saying, I would really like to teach about wash training, so water, sanitation, hygiene training in Panama. You can see when they depart. The sector, you can see that they're a language requirement. They'd like at least a year of Spanish. They're looking for 20 persons, couples accepted. You can serve with a partner if you'd like. On the right-hand side, you can filter. So if you're looking for education positions, you do not speak a Romance language, or the particular region of the world you want to go to, you can just filter it through and sort of cut out all the, I don't want to say cut out the fat because that sounds bad, but essentially cut out positions that are not necessarily relevant to your background or your preferences. With that, you actually choose to apply, and then you fill out a health history form, which is an automated form where you're telling Peace Corps if you have any medical concerns we would need to accommodate during service, high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma, et cetera. And really what we're looking for is, 1, can we provide you the medical care and medications you need? And 2, if whether or not that particular environment you might serve in will exacerbate that condition. Every now and again, I always get a person who has asthma who wants to serve in a really arid climate, and I have to tell them, like, maybe we should look somewhere else. Even if you've been managing your asthma very well here in the U.S., or usually I get the question from people up north when I was working in Massachusetts area. I'm like, it's a completely different ballgame from managing asthma in Massachusetts than it is from, say, Morocco, right? Different environment, different infrastructure. That might be the best place. When I was in Armenia, I had high blood pressure. Armenia is a high altitude. Altitude can affect blood pressure over time. So it's not an automatic disqualifier, but if it was, Peace Corps would let me know, like, hey, this country, we cannot provide this medication, we cannot support this here. Let's look at these alternatives. In Armenia, in my case, essentially they told me, okay, you're fine, you're barely on the spectrum, we can provide the medication. We would like you to come in every 6 months, or every 3 months, forgive me, for a follow-up blood pressure check to make sure that over time the altitude is not negatively affecting your health. And it didn't. I served for 3.5 years, no problem. So the idea behind this health history is to immediately, step 1, if you're not available to go to a particular country, that way we can isolate it right then and there, and you can look at alternative options. And if you do have a medical concern and you're not sure if Peace Corps can support it, please reach out to me directly. Again, my email is in the chat box. Do not give me the details. I have no reason knowing your personal business, but I can provide you the essentially the contact information for our nursing or pre-nurse department, and they can speak with you more about that. Anything medical or legal related has no business in this process. That is all done by separate units for your personal privacy. As far as the application, we get a little check mark that says, yes, you're cleared for medical, yes, you're cleared for legal. As far as any of the details behind that, you don't have to discuss that with anyone during Peace Corps. Do not want to prejudice your application in any way. So again, all three of this together is about an hour, hour and a half, depending on how long you spend browsing and setting up your documents. And then after this comes the interview, which is about 3 or 4 weeks later. And this is a Skype interview, so you don't have to travel for it. And it's behavior-based. So we're going to ask you questions. Tell me about a time you failed in the workplace. Tell me about a time you lived or worked in a multicultural environment. So really the more open-ended questions, because we really just want to get a sense of who you are, your maturity level, and your motivations for Peace Corps. After this, we make a yes or no determination to invite. We will invite you, we would like you to be a Peace Corps volunteer in Armenia, or no thank you, please reapply. If you receive no thank you, please reapply, please contact me directly. I don't always have direct information as to what happened, but I can tell you, hey, maybe we can build some experience, change this about your application, maybe we can apply to more suitable postings, etc. And realistically, this process actually goes pretty quick. If you apply in October, or let's say our next one, July 1st, for the browsing and apply, you'll receive this yes or no answer by September. So actually pretty quick turnaround time. And then everything from the actual departure period is basically going into the actual paperwork. You've been accepted, we would like you to serve. Now you have to see a doctor, get your follow-up shots, inoculations, sometimes go to a travel clinic if you need localized immunizations for that country, like for instance, maybe yellow fever, whooping cough, whatever. Legal clearance, are you a serial killer? Do you have felonies you haven't told us about? Things like that. And then also, of course, the actual paperwork, getting you a visa, a passport, the sort of general international based items. To be honest, I always call this more paperwork than you've ever wanted to see, but it does have that big carrot of you've already been accepted, so you know what it's for. After that, onboarding, basic online training. We link you with different programs or different persons serving in that country, so you can have that direct conversation. So you can look at what are your packing needs, what are things to focus on, et cetera. Also, just as a note, if you are chosen and they do link you with the other volunteers in that country, they will be shameless about trying to get you to bring over American candy and stuff like that. Just tell them no. Like you're prepping for 2 years. They can get their own Reese's. As far as departure, that's the happy portion. You get on the plane, you go to DC, Philadelphia, Miami, a large city where they do like a 3 or 4 day pre-training where they bring you and your group together, and then you all travel as a group to that country of service. So again, realistically, you have steps 1 through 3 together is just actually submitting that application. You have an interview over Skype. From there, you get a yes or no invitation to serve, and then you basically have the pre-clearance, like the paperwork stuff, and then departure. So we're always making this process simpler, faster, more easy to understand. And again, if you decide to apply and you're ever curious or you're trying to figure out where you stand in that application process, feel free to reach out to myself or another recruiter directly. I can look and tell you kind of what your status is. Again, they're not going to give me all the details because the placement team does need to be able to do their job as well without me getting in the way of it, but I can tell you, hey, your application is virtually sitting on a desk. We'll process it. Or I can tell you, hey, it might be better if you updated your resume a little bit at this time. So, just those general things I'm more than happy to help with at any time. Biggest advices we can provide is 1, do your research. Check out this listing of countries. Look at the actual description. Does this seem like something I can do? Does it seem like something I want to do? Does this seem like an environment I can thrive in? When I was looking at Armenia, they have really cold winters. A lot of people were really concerned. How am I going to survive winter? How am I going to deal with, the parkas and snow? I'm born and raised in Ohio. I don't care about winter. I'm like, that sounds kind of cool. Maybe if you're from South Florida and you're like, I really hate the cold, well, that might be a deal breaker for you, right? So just doing that research, looking up YouTube, reading by volunteer stories, and we have those on our website. Looking at the descriptions and requirements, and then also talking with a recruiter. I can give you direct advice. I can help make sure you're choosing something that matches your background and what you want. So as far as the application timing, when is the best time to apply? We have multiple application deadlines throughout the year. So you're not sort of married to one single time frame. For instance, right now or upcoming, July 1st, if you apply by July 1st, you get a yes or no, that invitation by September 1st, and then you're leaving January, February, or March, depending on the country. So again, this would be like you're submitting your application, you get that yes or no, you're doing paperwork somewhere between September 1st and January, February. February period, you're getting on the plane to leave for that country of service. You know, if this is too quick for you, or maybe you're just not graduating at this time, you have an October 1st, which is leaving around the summertime, April, May, June. So October 1st and January 1st are usually the most popular for seniors. You apply in October, you get a yes or no just before Christmas, you're leaving right after you graduate, right? You throw that cap off and you're heading towards the airport. Maybe that's too early, maybe you've got a, you've got a trip afterward or something, or maybe you're just not accepted this time around. Oh my God, they said please reapply. You talk to me, I tell you yes, actually reapply. January 1st, you know by March, you're on the plane July, August, September, later in the summer. So just a slight difference in departure from down here. April 1st, you apply by April, you know by June, you're leaving October, November, December, around the fall period. This is usually mostly agriculture-based positions. And this is also when I get a lot of students talk to me because you're getting near the end of senior year. Maybe you haven't figured out a job yet. Peace Corps just popped up on your radar, and that's fine as well. And then, of course, back to that July 1st, you're leaving right after the new year. So this is really great for persons graduating in that December period as well. But again, realistically, you can apply for multiples of these. If you're not selected, you can really decide to target it based upon when you're ready to go and then backtrack it to that apply by date. Our biggest tips is one, apply early. If it says July 1st, think June 1st. April 1st, March 1st. The earlier you can apply, the better chance we have. One, it gives us time in terms of technical issues. A lot of times around the eve of the application, the website might go down. So many people apply. Or I'll have, you apply July 1st. I really wanted to apply for Morocco. The next day, I really don't like Morocco. I'd really, really prefer, let's say, Cambodia. Well, the deadline just passed. Cambodia is no longer accepting applications. So, whereas if you apply in June, technical issues, whatever. I'll talk to tech team. We have plenty of time. Oh, I applied for a country, now I changed my mind. No problem. Let's just make a quick switch. Oh, my resume doesn't look that great. No problem. Let me update it for you. Right? You can have that one-on-one with the recruiter. That being said, if you do get to the last minute and you just want to get your application in, do that. I always tell people, if it's July 1st, it's getting close to the end of the day, you really want to apply, but your resume is not up to date, submit it and then send me an email. I can update your resume July 3rd, 4th, 5th. I can put in a new one for you. I can't change when you've applied, when that lock goes into place. So always good to apply early, but we do accept all the way up until that time period. Tailoring your resume, your motivation statement. Again, those are documents that I, as a recruiter, I'm happy to look over for you directly. Focus on featured openings. As you may have seen here, all of these show this little orange tag that say featured. This will not be here on every posting, but featured are positions that we're really trying to get a larger applicant pool for. And so usually if you're concerned about your qualifications, these are positions that we're really trying to fill and we're hoping to get a robust pool for. So I always tell people, think about it like Walmart, right? When you walk in, there's that shelf right in front of you of stuff to sell. It doesn't mean they're bad. Some of these positions, like Tanzania is beautiful, Cambodia, Colombia, it's just, these are places we're really looking for qualified volunteers. So we just really want to highlight that. And then the largest thing is always contact your recruiter. Contact me. If you're anywhere in South Florida, I'm the person that comes up on the website. I will work with you directly. When should you apply? How do I format my resume? How should I do my interview? I'll do everything I can to help make sure you're putting your best foot forward and to make sure that you're applying for something that matches our needs and your needs together. And you have a 55% higher chance every time. And if you don't like me, maybe you don't like my style, that's fine. Put in a zip code that is non-South Florida, look for someone else. We're more than happy to work with you. There's 70 recruiters all across the country now who will work with you. If you have a little more experience, the general program I've been speaking about this entire time is our Peace Corps volunteer program. That's the 2 years, 3 months, 27 months. We also have a response program, which is 3 to 12 months in length, and that is focused more on response to a specific need in that country and usually more highly skilled professionals. So by highly skilled, I mean like 6 to 10 years direct experience in the field. And I don't mean that internship. I mean like you've had your degree, you've been in the field for 6 to 10 years full time. The difference in scope, when I was in Armenia, I was a 2-year volunteer. Again, I extended, so that would be, I was working with teachers, I was working with students, I was working in a general community, teaching English to grades 3 through 12 and doing alternative programs. We had a Peace Corps response, education, modernize and modify the nationwide curriculum for English for grades 3, 4, and 5. So much higher level and technical skill sets. I would have not had the experience and knowledge necessary to complete that position. So if you are someone who's, maybe has a PhD or in a PhD program, has some experience in the field, or just your Peace Corps is not ready, you're not ready for Peace Corps now, but you're thinking a few years, this might be another program to consider as well. Again, feel free to contact me about either. Global Health Service Partnership, that program has been that was focused on working with medical care staff in terms of teacher training. That's been kind of rolled into our response program. So again, if you have questions about any of those programs, always reach out to me. So some of the highlights before I go slightly over for the Q&A section are: 1, you decide where you go. That is one thing about our project. You can either go serve anywhere, like let Peace Corps help me make a decision, or you decide, I want to serve in Costa Rica as an education volunteer. The host countries invite the Peace Corps, so we don't play political games, we don't throw money around. Countries invite us for purposes of training and culture exchange, and then we go there, we do the job they ask us to do. So as far as our model, we're very focused on integration, on respecting the local community, learning the language. So we're definitely not playing that sort of like political power games. We're actually pretty actively against that. Language and technical training, we provide you everything you need to succeed in that program, not only with just the direct language and technical training, but also with local support networks for volunteers. We pay for absolutely everything. You do have technology to stay in touch. The idea of the mud hut in the middle of nowhere is kind of outdated. Just as international development now, you need a cell phone, you need some internet connections, if nothing else, to check on the status of your grant applications and safety and security reasons. 24/7 access to Peace Corps for you and your family. Your grandmother has an issue, or in the case of my mother, there's an earthquake and she's freaking out. They can contact Peace Corps either to notify you that there's a problem you need to come home for, or just to check in on your status because they haven't heard from you or something's going on. Service is backed by the U.S. government. Again, Uncle Sam sponsors and pays for and backs everything. So there's absolutely no doubt on my resume that I've done what I've done. I can provide a description of service which says exactly Adam Hausch has 10,000 plus hours in the field as an educator, training, design, management, has done projects up to this amount of dollars for this amount of participants, et cetera. And then again, that professional network of 265,000 volunteers, and that is one wonderful network to bank off of. And then again, just you actually go out, help others, make a real lasting change. You do something good, which is sometimes, at least for me, I feel like there are limited opportunities to do so. And Peace Corps is one of those, not only do we provide the opportunity, we provide the funding to make sure that opportunity is accessible to you. And then we also make it in a way that it can benefit your longer term career goals. So here is, again, my information. And I know I've gone slightly over, so my apologies. If you do need to leave, please feel free to go. But if you do have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the chat box now. And I do see one question that was sent to me privately. Do you have to be 18 or older? At this time, yes. You must be 18 years of age, just because you have to legally be considered an adult to go abroad, and then with our program. And then secondly, you have to be a United States citizen. That's because we will be taking the initiative in those countries for things like your banking, safety, and security, and we need to basically be able to act on your behalf in those governments. And if you're a non-U.S. citizen or below the age of 18, the first issue is, well, this person is a minor. You need to talk to their parents. which is sometimes we might not have time to make that step. And then as far as the citizenship, they tell us, mind your own business. This is a citizen of this country with our country. The U.S. government has no reason to be involved in this. So those two are pretty firm. But obviously, once you become the age of 18, you're welcome to apply. And same with citizenship. I've met a lot of persons in the South Florida area who came to the U.S. when they were younger. They became a U.S. citizen. And literally, I've seen some people literally right after they receive their U.S. citizenship, they go into the Peace Corps and they go back abroad. So that process is very accessible as well. If you are a native speaker for a certain language but haven't taken college coursework, can you still apply for that site? Most definitely, yes. To be honest, the only real places that the native speaking that language requirements really come into play are, again, those Spanish speaking and some French speaking sites. Most other countries, the assumption is starting from zero. But being a native speaker or even just having some knowledge of the language always looks great. I believe depending on the post, they may ask you to take a Spanish exam or a French exam, but it's not a difficult process to do that or certify that information. But especially for our Spanish speaking posts, being a native speaker is a gigantic plus. I'd say that's one of our larger applicant pools, just because a lot of people learn Spanish in the U.S. as a secondary language, but it's also a place where we also still have a shortage. So we're always looking for Spanish speakers. And also realistically, depending on where you go, a lot of persons in the field not only may be speaking or utilizing Spanish, they may be utilizing a local indigenous language as well. Actually, I know from FIU, I had a volunteer who he was born and raised in Guatemala, got his citizenship in the States, and then he went abroad. It was either Peru or Panama, but he was placed in a pretty rural village, and he said on a day-to-day, he would speak Spanish in some cases, but he said a lot of his villagers, when they were speaking amongst each other, used, I think it was Quechua. It might be a different language, but he said it was interesting because he initially thought he can just use Spanish. But, in that case, it's definitely a positive, yes. Thank you. Excellent. Well, I don't see any other questions, and I do know I've gone slightly over on time, so I want to thank everyone for their time. If you do have any follow-up questions, again, feel free to reach out to me at my email, ahausch@peacecorps.gov, or feel free to call or text at that 802-829-1513 number. Amelia or Nima, do you have any? Oh.
No, I was just going to tell you, Adam, thank you so much for sharing these insights. Every time you present, I learn something new about this amazing organization and involvements. And I think this could be a great opportunity for many of our students. So Adam, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And we look forward to the next time you're able to connect with our students.
Thank you very much. I look forward to connecting as well. And I look forward to hopefully sometime in the future being able to come back on campus and physically reconnecting with everyone.
Absolutely.
Within safety guidelines, of course.